From the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Good.
Okay. Today is Wednesday, June the 1st, 2011. My name is Joe Mosnier of the Southern Oral History Program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm with filmmaker and videographer John Bishop. We are in Montgomery, Alabama, to do an oral history interview for the project entitled the Civil Rights History Project, which is a joint undertaking of the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Today we're in Montgomery to visit with Dr. Gwen Patton. Dr. Patton, thank you so much for the welcome, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
I thought I'd start today. Before we turned on, we talked about the fact that that there are places here in your longer story where we want to be sure we place some extra emphasis. So let me pick up today with this question for us to begin. Can you paint the picture of Tuskegee in the fall of '61 when you arrived to start your years at Tuskegee?
Well, it was impressive. It was a large campus in terms of acreage. The buildings were very, to some extent, ornate. The main street leading up to the university, which we called Campus Avenue, intrigued me because there were no front entrances to the buildings on the main thoroughfare. So I was intrigued by that. And then, of course, when we went through the Lincoln Gates, and I knew that was named after Abraham Lincoln, the National Guard greeted us. And that somewhat didn't frighten me, but it bothered me. And they were very courteous, but curt. And living with my grandmother, whom I called Mommy on my mother's side, I knew how to be stoic and not to be too expressive, and I took cues from her, and we went right on onto the campus. Later, I learned that the National Guard had been called up because they were integrating the schools in the city, and they were to be there for protection, which kind of baffled me because they were state troopers, and they had never been friendly or kind. And I had some understanding how the state could be trumped, if you will, by the federal, by the national. And so they were not under the auspices of, I think, Governor Patton at the time, but rather under President Kennedy at the time. So I learned that, and I worked through that. And the buildings with no doors on the main thoroughfare, which you would assume, I later learned that Booker T. Washington, even though I have to make clear that Adams founded the school, but Booker T. Washington developed the school. And though he was called an Uncle Tom, especially by the black intelligentsia, with his 5 fingers and the fists and all of that, the Atlanta Exposition, and an argument with Du Bois, that I learned that indeed he was a race man, and he built the doors, front doors, entrances, facing the campus. And because the thoroughfare was used by white and black people, and he didn't want them to feel like they were welcomed. And so all of the doors, if you go there even to this day, they're faced inward to the campus. So that kind of pleased me. I like that. And then I learned a lot more about Tuskegee's history from subsequent presidents much later in life. But when I broke my leg in the car, I didn't break it, but this mysterious car accident in 1967, I had learned a lot about Tuskegee, its history. I knew some before I went there, because when I was 12 years old, or 11, I wrote my paper on George Washington Carver, and tried to dispel the myth of the Peanut Man, that kind of reduced him. And I saw him as a scientist, and I learned about yams, because he also did stuff with yams. And I learned about paints, and I also understood he had contracts with the paint people. And I learned about Ford, he and Henry Ford. I think my daddy told me that. My father, Clarence Robert Patton, Sr., was a race man. In fact, I come from a race family on both sides. So I was rather astute in the history of black people, even as a child. And so in '67, with all of that thinking, all of what I knew about Tuskegee, Robert Moton, who was the president of Tuskegee after Washington, and they were building the VA hospital mainly for World War I veterans. Not mainly, but for black World War I veterans. There was this dispute as to who would be the doctors and the nurses, the professional staff. And the authorities to be, coming from Washington, we have to understand Woodrow Wilson, said that the professional staff will be white people, and the help, the maintenance and the nurses' aides and the bedpan deliverers and removers and all of that will be black people. Well, Robert Russell Moton, who was president, said, no, we have black doctors. In fact, Tuskegee had a nursing program for RNs, or to become RNs. And there was Meharry College, which produced black doctors. And he said, oh, no. We're going to have black professional staff. And living within the confines of Jim Crow, he was kind of on target. And the white powers to be, because they saw money, they saw jobs, said, oh, that's not going to be. So it became a big struggle. We're talking about in the 1920s now, 1910s, 18s, teens. And they said that if a black person, professional, crossed those doors at the VA hospital, the Klan will be there to do X, Y, and Z, which was violence. And Dr. Moton said, oh, okay. So he called out all of the World War I black veterans. This is lore, because I was not there, and nor were my parents. And the story is that they lined the highway to the VA hospital, the black veterans, and the Klan never showed up.
It's a proud history. There's no question.
Of Tuskegee.
Absolutely. Excuse me.
Okay, we're back.
We're back after just a short break to adjust a microphone. Dr. Patton, you were connecting.
Yeah, and
deeper
so to
history.
bring that full circle, in 1967, when I was in this mysterious car accident in Shorter, Alabama, and I found myself in John Andrews Hospital, which was on the campus, and coming through some recovery, and that's a whole nother story. I wrote a piece called Booker T. Washington in Retrospect, the father of Black Power, which validated why I wanted to go to Tuskegee in the first place. And what people don't know is that the first contemporary Black Power conference was held at Tuskegee and not in New Jersey. And so Tuskegee was part of my deepening my understanding of race pride and race progress.
The conference you've just mentioned is the one in '67 organized by Sharp? Yeah.
In Jersey?
No, the one on the campus.
On campus, it was organized by SNCC, and I underwrote it. You're talking about the Southern Human Relations Project? Yes, which was, and we called it Sharp. We underwrote it.
Yeah.
You have to understand my role as a Sharp organizer.
We'll come to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And but it was really led by SNCC.
Okay, we'll come to that in some detail. That's great. We'll talk that through. Your initial, obviously, we won't stop to do a lot of the personal history that brings you to that point. But by '61, you obviously, as you say, are kind of a race person. You're very attentive and conscious about these things. Your family's been quite assertively attentive, and in many different ways.
All of my life.
All of your life, exactly. But you're also a student starting college, and you do things like cheerleading and
Oh, yes.
going to class and theater and
Oh,
all those
yes.
things. Is there much that distinguishes that period between your arrival on the campus and then your departure to the sanitarium when you have to go for the TB period, tuberculosis period? Is there much in that early period on the campus where you're closely connected to civil rights or not?
Yes, because I had to communicate back to Montgomery, and you had the Freedom Riders that come through. That's when I learned some additional things about my family.
This is the prior spring before you were in
May 1961. I call it
Exactly.
the Mother's Day Massacre.
Yeah.
And the following day, which was a school day, I was at the mass meeting that they held all night.
Let's back up just one sec. So what happens is the Freedom Riders come into town,
Right.
and
And there's just all kinds of activity. The Montgomery movement infrastructure jumped into gear. Hazel Gregory, who was the secretary to Dr. King and the Montgomery Improvement Association, and a dear mentor of mine, along with some other ladies, Mrs. Odessa Williams, later became Redding, they all jumped into gear to rescue and provide refuge for the Freedom Riders. Telephones were abuzz with, they're beating the stew out of them, do something. But not in the household where I was, with my Aunt Chick and my Aunt Flora, who were two school teachers. My grandmother, Mommy, eccentric, did not have a telephone. Okay, and I could talk. But my Aunt Mary, who lived next door to my Aunt Chick, who had lived in Pittsburgh, was a little bit more broad-minded. And so she was a part of the movement in somewhat of a real sense, though my Aunt Chick and Aunt Flora were as well in lending their cars. But they were school teachers, and, the reprisals, as well as they were kind of status conscious, if you understand what I'm saying. They were school teachers, quote unquote. Aunt Mary was a seamstress, also a school teacher, but had made a living, basically, as a seamstress and a tailoress. And her husband was self-employed, as a house painter. So Aunt Mary comes to tell me about what's happening downtown at the Greyhound bus station. And I want to go to the mass meeting. I knew Aunt Chick was not going to take me because I was a child of the entire family. I went to Aunt Mary's house, called my grandparents, the Pattons, who were very much involved, and they were independent workers, had their own business. They came and got me. And so I went to that, stayed all night and all of that. And
Well, I have to ask you to say a little bit more, because you stayed all night because of very complicated, difficult situation. Can you explain that at the mass meeting?
well, as a child, I'm 17, I knew there was terror outside, the Kluxers, as we call them. We didn't call them KKK, we call them Kluxers. My family called them the Kluxers. But as a teenager, like other teenagers in that mass meeting, we felt invincible. And the adults, most of whom knew that God was going to protect us. And see, that had been introduced and then reinforced during the Montgomery bus boycott. We knew there was divine intervention. So basically, there was no fear. Now, we saw these white men walking up and down and up, inside. I had no idea they were police or detectives or whatever. I thought they were newspaper people. And so that was that. And then a youngster, younger than I, Joe Lacey, was summoned downstairs in the basement. And you have to see First Baptist. It's a beautiful church. And I later learned, I didn't know that night, that he was instructed to crawl through the basement window to go to his grandmother's home, which was not far, to make telephone calls to those who had telephones to let people know we were okay. And he had to crawl under the houses. And at that time, we didn't have encasements around houses. The houses were built on what I call sticks. And then later on, they put aluminum around them. And then later on, they bricked them and so forth. And later on, they tore them down. So that I do recall. He was about 14, youngster. We considered him, I was 17, a senior in the whole 9 yards. I recall that. But we just sang songs and, and...
I think that day, earlier that day, some of the Freedom Riders had come to one of your relatives' home.
My Aunt Chick's home.
Yeah, and an integrated group of riders.
Right.
And I'm interested in having you recount the reaction of your...
Oh, my goodness. So I had them over. I was curious. I'd been up all night with them, And see, there were lots of them.
So this is the day following the mass
The day
meeting?
following. And some of them stayed out at Reverend Solomon Say's home out in Madison Park. And that's another story. It's an old black community.
Let's leave that story and tell me the one that's in your...
So anyway,
aunt's house.
Teenagers all over the city, I don't want to make it seem like it was just me, that sections of Freedom Riders came to each other's homes. And my home was selected, where I lived. And I was staying with my Aunt Chick and Flora, who were school teachers. And I was enjoying them, talking about the freedom movement and all of that. And when Aunt Chick came home, Flora taught in Lowndes County, which is the country. So she came home much later, a longer drive. And Aunt Chick was very smart, in her dress, and she wore these spiked high heels, and she had a clickety-clack when she walked. Poise and all of that business. And when she came home and walked through the living room and saw these black and white kids or young adults and sitting on our sofa, I did not notice that she was disconcerted. She didn't just display that. And because of whatever affectations, and maybe I even have some of that as being a product of that, she says, Gwendolyn, come with me. And I go to the kitchen. And I knew she was going to get cookies and lemonade. I mean, that's the nice thing to do. We call them repasts. And as we prepared the tray, Aunt Chick said to me in a very admonishing tone, I don't want any white people in my house. Now, I'm a race person. Had not seen many white people in my life, my entire life. But I saw something a little different about, it was only one white boy. And I saw something different about him. And I said, oh, Aunt Chick, I say, I might have used, there are different kinds of white people. They're not like the Kluxers. You know, I had this discussion. And she made it very clear. As long as I have to go through the back door of white folks' houses, they are not to enter the front door of my home. And we always made a distinction between houses and home. And I had to take that under consideration. And then she click-clacked, and I'm following behind her, took the lemonade and the cookies out to the group, and we ate, and they stayed a little while, and then they soon left.
Let me ask you about your experience in the sanitarium in Lafayette, because
Lafayette.
Lafayette, excuse me. Thank you, Lafayette, Alabama. You entered the sanitarium because tuberculosis in, was it early
63 January. January.
And were there until March of 64, so a year and a couple of months. And I know that, having read some of the things you've written that allude to that experience, it was difficult, including in reasons obviously related to race. Can you sort of describe the essence of your experience in those months?
Well, I love the inpatients. It was a segregated facility. You had to enter, I did, the back door, up some steps. I can still remember at age 68, the banisters, or whatever you call it, rickety. I was extremely weak. I came up in an ambulance from Tuskegee, John Andrews Hospital. I knew about tuberculosis. It was a plague. And then being at John Andrews, in the isolation unit, I had oxygen. At that time, you had a tent. You didn't have the little thing. You had a tent. And everybody was in white, all covered up, mask, head, though. So I knew this was something very drastic, because I really didn't know about TB and consumption. I knew about cancer, which was called the dreaded Big C, but I did not really know about tuberculosis. I didn't even know it affected the lungs. So I'm already traumatized by this disease. So when I get up to Lafayette, and it's Benson, I believe it is, I have the correct name, Sanitarium. The front of the building is very impressive. I have a photo of the building here in my archives at home. Very impressive. Now, mind you, I have not been around white people. And those few I was around were not authority figures. So we ride on around, go through the back, gravel and red dirt, as they say down south, the red dirt. And the ambulance people help me out. I'm weak. And I go through this back door, which is a vestibule. but it served as a intake room. I knew something then was wrong. So after the intake and all of the paperwork, there's this vestibule, and the vestibule leads to a horizontal, perpendicular hallway. And coming in, I go to the left. There are patients in the hall on beds. There are 3 rooms. The first room in which I was placed had 3 beds. The second huge room, I think, might have had 6 to 8 beds. You cross that hall, and there was a little black and white TV that was smaller than the television that I ever had in any of my homes or abodes. And then across the hall was another huge room with about 8 to 10 patients.
And you're describing the segregated black section of
And that's the woman's side.
Yeah.
The bathroom was, if I can describe, you got the vestibule, then you come up to this horizontal hallway, perpendicular, and then after you pass that entrance to the hallway, there is another hallway that continues vertically, and it's massive. At least it looked massive to me, and glistening, the floors. And on that side, you had the kitchen, and then you had the bathroom on the other side, if I'm making sense, across the hallway. I did not know that men were on the other side of the hallway from the women's section. So they placed me in the 3-bedroom. I guess that was for the elite. And of course it was crowded. And I guess for the first 6 months, with shots every day, streptomycin, and trying to get strength, I didn't really pay any attention to the overall conditions, except that I knew when I was able to get up and walk and go to the various huge wards, I guess. I was in the private room. The 2 wards, I found it horrifying. And we would clean up. And I thought that was part of the therapy, because I now know it's a lung problem and I need to strengthen. And we would clean up our own area, mop and everything. And I thought it was part of the therapy of strengthening oneself. And so here it is now, about June. I'm strong. And a little girl comes in with her mommy. And they're in the ward. The larger ward. And I feel a responsibility to be her mentor. I had learned how to crochet, and I had already known how to crochet, but I crocheted so much. I tatted, made lace, and, I was, all of that. Learning from my grandmother on my mama's side, mommy. So I asked to be moved to the larger ward so I can be with the little girl. Her mama was very deathly ill. Never, ever got from under the oxygen tent. And I guess it's about August. Well, before August. No, it's August now. Yes, August. And there's the March on Washington. And we sit on this little bitty black and white TV. And of course, at that time, the state, Governor Wallace, I think, was governor. And the state could just take away the television. It would just go on what we call the blink. But I saw enough of it to discern that this was important. This was about black people, it was about our rights, it was about freedom. And then soon after that, in September, the 4 little girls in Birmingham. And that came on because we all watched the news. At least I would insist, because you had to fight about what we were going to look at. A lot of them wanted to watch the little, Search for Tomorrow or whatever, those little soap boxes. But the news came on at 6 o'clock, so there was not a conflict. And I always wanted to watch the news. And so I then learned, I said, oh my goodness, wow. So then I took an extremely special interest in the little girl. She was 9 years old. And for the life of me, I cannot remember her name. And by the way, we very seldom knew our last names. And it was at that point that I said, look, the movement is wherever you are. I have been taught that the movement is not something that's imposed. It's not an extracurricular activity. It's wherever you are. And so that Sanitarium became my movement base. And I said, now we need to. Meanwhile, they were bringing magazines to us on the cart and that business. And so my mind said, I wonder if this place has a library. And I asked, I said, is there a library in here? And they did, I think they were stunned. And out of that, oh yes, I don't know what the motivation was. And I said, it's probably up that shiny hall. And so one day I took the little girl by hand and I ventured. And there were maintenance people, housekeeping people, mopping and sweeping and taking care of, but we had to clean up our own. There was a game room. You know, it was what do you call splendor? There was this huge baby grand piano in what we would call a sitting room or a parlor. And I had taken music lessons all of my life. So I went there and I sat down and I started playing bum, 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 Chopin, C sharp, prelude in C sharp minor. And you know, it has a real classic kind of dum, dum, and all. And of course, the white people were just stunned, if not angry. And across from the sitting room, there was a sitting room that was the front entrance in its vestibule. And then on the other side of that was the library. And I went over there. After white people started looking at me peculiar, my little brain said, oh no, you're not going to do this. Because they'll have you up here like a toy. And I'll be coming up here playing, you know, which made me fundamentally no different than a nanny taking care of a white child at the expense of my own. So I said, I better stop this. So I go to the library and I pull out some books. And then I politely walk back down the hall. Nobody said anything to me. The doctor was in and out, so he was like not a real participant. And I guess this was the head nurse or whoever was in charge, but she was a woman. And she came to talk to me quietly that I was not to do thus and so, going up to the library.
White woman.
White woman. And all of her white starch kind of remind me later on the nurse that flew over the cuckoo nest. And I told her that I'm a college student and this is a little girl. And y'all need to work out some kind of arrangement for me and this child to go to the library. And I guess there was a human inkling in her. And so she arranged on Jim Crow terms for me and the little girl to go to the library. I can't remember what days, but we would go and nobody would be in there but us. And we could look and pull the books and maybe stay for about 30 minutes and read the books because we couldn't bring them back. We could bring magazines, but not the books. and sit up there and read the books. I read her children's stories or whatever. And so that was my first, not my first protest, but that was, and then secondly, I got tired of the food. They always gave us boil-up food. And what I mean by boil-up food, greens, which were healthy, I'm not opposed to that, but boil-up food, potatoes, stew. And I asked one day, I said, how come we eat all of this kind of food? Don't y'all have some other kinds of food? And whoever this nurse was, she said, well, Gwen, you probably won't like this food. I said, well, what is it? She said, well, we're having oyster stew. I said, made with cream or milk? And she said, oh, you? I said, yes, ma'am. I was polite. I said, I like to see the menu. And I think we ought to have a chance to look at the menu and see what you all are serving totally. And put it on our little bulletin board. And after that, she didn't say anything's done. They didn't know what to do. They were ready to hurry on and get me out of there. And then I decided I'd go to the kitchen. Because see, when you walk down the little colored section and to the main expansive hallway, the kitchen was right there, not too far away. And I went in the kitchen and looked. And by that time, I guess I had a reputation because nobody admonished me, nobody threatened me, nobody insulted me. They were polite. And I looked and looked and looked and saw what they saw. And then they started posting the menu. So when they had perch fish as opposed to whiting, when they had baked fish instead of fried fish, I would choose, other, and try to encourage my fellow patients to do likewise. Now, the other thing that was interesting about the sanatorium, they had a chapel, a little prayer kind of room on the glistening hallway. We had to go outdoors. And we would go outdoors and sit at this wooden table under a tree. I think it was a pecan tree. And that's where we had our services. We never had a minister. We would conduct our own services. And the songs were always one I remember most. Way over yonder where Jesus is. Way over yonder where Jesus is. I got a mother over yonder. I remember that because my mother had passed. And I learned a whole lot of new songs that we never sang in the Baptist churches here in Montgomery. They were real, I used to call dirges of Christian music. They were sad, and they were always about death. So anyway, that had an impact on me.
Let me ask about all this. You obviously were polite and though youthful, a young adult, obviously had an air of confidence and assertion about yourself. Why do you think they tolerated you in those demands that you made, given what they might have said?
I think that they were impressed with my intelligence. I think that they had made the assumption that black people were ignorant and stupid. And when they could see that I would discuss with them, I was determined. I was not trying to raise them, nor lift their consciousness. No, that was not, but I would say things. Why is it important for you to keep black people and little children from learning? And I think they had no answers or couldn't answer. And they knew I was going to be temporary. So they were really figuring on how to get me out of there and would tolerate me. And I think to a certain extent respect me at the same time. Because I made dollies and stuff, what do you call, ducks, I can't, little stuffed animals.
Oh, yeah.
And then my folks were sending me pajamas. You see, I also had that extended support base. I'm sure they had read about me, my grandparents, and all they knew also that if something happened to me wrong, there will be at least some level of hell to pay. And whenever there were visiting times, my folks came. Tuskegee people came. So I think it's that support base as well. And I would make ducks and give them to them. The little head nurse who would come in all the time. I gave her a little duck. The doctor, I used to make these hard crochet hearts. I knew how to stitch and double stitch and pick up stitching, and then stuff them, get satin and then stuff it with cotton. And I would make little ones and I would give them to the doctors and, and people like that. So.
Thank you for that description of the...
And by the way, I was the only one with a college education.
Yes.
Well, with some, because I had not graduated.
Joe, let's pause for a
Okay.
sec.
That was lovely.
Yeah, we're rolling again.
We're back after a short break. Dr. Patton, let me ask you about arriving back on the Tuskegee campus in the fall of '64. It's a campus now that SNCC folks are visiting.
Everywhere.
Pick up the story with what you came back to.
Well, when I came back, I had a roommate. Cannot think of her name. But tuberculosis was considered like a plague. And she did not want to be my roommate. She was scared to death. That was one big fat disease. And that bothered me to some extent, but it didn't, because the community of Montgomery embraced me. I got a job in the cleaners between, convalescing. And I had a sense of humor. My folks loved me. They would make it their business to drink a glass of water from my glass of water. They didn't put any disinfectant in the water. And so I have to always have this background story. So one day where am I? I'm staying with Mommy. But I'm at my cousin Flora and Aunt Chicks, the La-Di-Da teachers. And I'm eating there, and I'm washing dishes, and I pour some Clorox in the water. And they say, Gwen, you don't have to do that, being very, somewhat paternalistic and caring and loving. I said, oh, yes, I do. And they said, no, we love you, that's okay. I said, I don't need to catch a cold from one of y'all, I might get TB again. And they all laughed, so I kind of, so I was prepared. But when this roommate acted such a fool and trying to make me into a big fat germ, I asked for her to leave or to put me somewhere else. And so the school, I was in Travis Hall, which was the honor dorm. So the school moved her. So I had my own room, you see. So I was really privileged. Everybody else had a roommate but me. So when the SNCC people would come, the women, they could all stay in my room. And they did. And they all knew I'd had TB and, and they never made an issue out of it. Whatever cake my grandmama sent, they ate it. If I bit off of it, they bit and all. So it was that sisterhood that gave me even further strength from the greater community.
What do you make of these? Let me ask you, what do you make of these SNCC women?
They were tough. They were tough. Committed, resolute. But sometimes I thought if they, sometimes I thought maybe I was too deep. You know, that maybe there was something wrong with the way I was thinking. Because I was never for integration, ever, in my life.
What were you for instead?
Desegregation, equal opportunity, fairness, justice. And see, that goes all the way back to when I was in high school. I graduated from high school in Montgomery, and they wanted me to go to University of Alabama because
They being?
the school authorities, the principal, and my history teacher, my government teacher, and all, because because I was from up north.
But still a black high school at that point.
Yeah, but I'm in a black community up there.
Yes.
But they don't see that. They saw that I was from, even though they don't even knew about Inkster, but Detroit. So they made these assumptions. And so they assumed that I would know how to interact with white people and not be frightened or afraid or whatever, which I would not have been. But I didn't see the sense of going to University of Alabama for what? How has University of Alabama distinguished itself? You know, all my life I've learned about George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, yams and peanuts and science. You know, what? So when they said, well, there's football and Bear Bryant, I said, oh, can I be a cheerleader? And they considered that frivolous. And I wanted to be the world's best cheerleader. I mean, that was like an avocation of mine before I was in this mysterious car accident. So they said, don't be frivolous, Gwen, don't be silly. So when they said that, I said, well, I'm not going up there. So getting back, if I can make the story whole, I was never for integration for the sake of integration. And then you have to also understand my upbringing. You know, I didn't think I learned any better sitting next to a white child. You know, that was not my paradigm. I didn't define myself in juxtaposition to white people. And that was reinforced with my grandmother, which goes all the way back to 56 on the bus after the boycott. And she always sat in the back. And I would always sit up in the front and aggravate white folks. They were sitting there squirming and pushing and all. Being a kid, I'm 14 at that time, 15. And one day there were no white folks on the bus, so I went and sat in the back with Mommy. I said, we walked all these years, all these days, you walked. And my mama and daddy sent money and shoes and do. And you still sit in the back. I thought she was capitulating. I knew she was a block captain. I knew she was in the movement. I knew she thought voting was important. But I still thought maybe you are afraid of white folks in a certain kind of way. And she, very ladylike, extremely ladylike, had far more class than my la-di-da teacher relatives. And she always called me Gwendolyn, the whole name, not Gwen, but Gwendolyn. Very proper. And she said, Gwendolyn, the bus boycott was not about sitting next to white people. It was about sitting anywhere you please. And I am pleased to sit here. And I had to sit back and take that in, which altered my whole thought process. So when I meet SNCC people, all men and women, in 64, this is before Black Power, and they were about integrating and thus and so, I had a different kind of perspective. But I knew these were some good people. They were dedicated. And maybe I need to look at my perspective as well to understand, be self-critical, which I did not alter. Because the more I saw, the more I said, this is silly. And it began with the desegregation of schools in Macon County. You know, they were getting the middle class kids, the professional children, to integrate the white school, which was downtown Tuskegee, when the poor black and the poor working folks lived in downtown Tuskegee, So they could have what? Walking distances to the white folks' homes to clean up, take care of the children, and the husbands to be the yard man or the handyman. So why are we going way over here in a bourgeois subdivision, which is going to require busing, when we got black children right over here? So that was my first, oh no, it ain't about integration. You know, these folks. And then at Tuskegee, you had the Negro swimming pool, where the professional, and so, you know, children, and the VA and Tuskegee Institute children, I use that word purposely, swam in the Negro pool, let's say on a Monday and a Wednesday, and the poor and the working class Negro children swam in the same pool on a Tuesday and Thursday. So I saw right away the class problem in the cast. And I had to just really struggle with this thing, integration. And integration for whom? And so I just had a different perspective.
Sure. Let me ask about some of these very thoughts are right at the front of your mind, I imagine, when you are sorting out with SNCC the creation on campus of tile.
Right.
In early '65.
Yeah, I didn't believe in submerging. And see, that goes all the way back.
Describe that didn't believe in submerging a little more. Can you explain that a little bit?
You should not take the identity of a grassroots organization. You should not subsume them. As an organizer, you should do everything to lift them up so they can have their own identity, their own structure, their own sense of how they're going to run that community organization. Now, that didn't come to me as a brilliant thought. That came to me as a result of MIA. When the Southern Christian Leadership Conference formed in 1957 at my church, I talk Southern, I like Southern church, we say church, Hutchinson Missionary Baptist Church. And they wanted the MIA to become a chapter, an SCLC chapter. And my grandparents and the folks whom I respected and had worked with as a child and as a teenager said no. It was a Montgomery Improvement Association that spearheaded and directed and kept together the 381 days we walked. We are not going to give up that identity. And to this very day, we have never had an SCLC chapter, but we still have MIA. So I'm coming from that experience and bringing it to SNCC. You know, we have an organization. It's called the Tuskegee Institute Advancement League, TILE. We were here before you got here. We were involved in direct action. I was the direct action chair. You know, we got a movement. We're not only fighting the race question, we're fighting the class question within black people, which they had not a clue, because they subsumed all black folk were alike. And we saw the sharp distinctions. Dr. Foster, who was president of Tuskegee, and I have him on a video, by the way, in the archives, would have a Christmas party. See, at Tuskegee was really a very bourgeois school. We didn't wash. We had a laundry on campus. And they would come and collect our clothing and our linen and wash it and bring it back. I mean, it was a very bougie school, as close to a prep school as you could get. But Dr. Foster, the president, would have the laundry people, the maintenance people, the help on the grounds, not the grounds superintendent, you know, he was in the bougie class, at one Christmas party, and then the professional and the VA people at another Christmas party. So when I became student body president, which I'm leaping, I would always talk to him about cost effectiveness. And that became a principle of mine as we interacted and we became very close. I said, you know, it costs far more money for you to have 2 distinct Christmas parties than if you had one. And he, being a businessman, you know, with a PhD, probably a master's in business, and I don't know what his PhD was in, because I don't know if they had PhD in businesses at the time. He could look at the bottom line. And he began to reason with me. And soon afterwards, we almost became peers. But I respected him as an authority. And plus, he had impeccable grammar. In fact, all of the black presidents, not all, but many, would send their writings or speeches to him for him to proofread and edit and the whole lot. And I was impressed, you know, with his grammar.
There's so much activity on the campus in the fall of '64, early '65. But let me take the story to March '65. Your election as president will follow, but you are a very significant figure in organizing Inside Tile and a campus figure. And can you tell the story of those several weeks in March, from Bloody Sunday through the Alabama State Capitol?
Well,
Well, you'll see the Alabama State Capitol a couple of times because...
yeah, the march that didn't turn around.
Yeah.
Tuskegee had become a liberated zone.
By which you mean, how did it feel?
SNCC stayed wherever they wanted to. They went to classes. They ate in the dining hall. You know, the whole 9 yards.
So that is to say that the administration had given up an effort
Had
to
totally
try to-
given up.
Right.
And we had faculty support. Gene Wiley, Maggie McGee, Dean Wasserstrom. It was a very complex situation because Dr. Foster had hired all of these white people who were progressive, which always fascinated me because most white people who come to black college campuses are progressives, you know. And Gene Wiley was black. And so they displaced the black professionals. I never forget this. So I had a meeting later on, as when I was student body president, of black and white professors getting together to see if we can work this thing through. Because the black professors were becoming nationalists, you know. And the white professors were our buddies, you know. So anyway, that's another story. But prior to the march from Selma to Montgomery, SNCC, as I said, was everywhere on campus and had freedom, you know. And Dr. Foster really not knowing what to do, and Tuskegee being a quasi-private and public institution, the state had no authority. You know, Governor Wallace and the state apparatus. So students would go to Lowndes County, go to Dallas County, you know, and help organize. And that made sense to us because we were now toying with the whole concept that education has to be relevant. And if you're not serving the community, then what good does it mean for you to get a degree? And so we would win those arguments intellectually. And we played excellent chess. I was a real excellent bridge player. You know, so it was all of that, if you can see the complexity of what we were becoming. Plus, our professors had us read de Tocqueville. When you read that, how are you supposed to come out of that? You know, and then we had Negro history was compulsory, you know. So when you read Du Bois, whatever his limitations, or Booker T, whatever his limit, how are you supposed to come out of that? I mean, I thought education was to inform you and change your behavior. And so it changed our behavior to be more revolutionary. You know, I dealt with the whole question of homosexuality. In fact, my sophomore paper was on homosexuality. I went to look that up in the card catalog at the time, and it always said deviant behavior. And I had a cousin, Bobby, who lived with me while I was in Inkster at Wayne State in library science, who was in love with a neighborhood family friend that my brother and I knew was a sissy, because that's what we called him, a sissy. His name was Junior. His name was Robert Harris. They both died, so I can call a name. And we loved Junior. We called him Junior. And we loved him. But we could not understand why Bobby didn't see that he was a sissy. We didn't know gay. Gay was not a term. And anyhow, she got pregnant. So we said, well, maybe he ain't. Right? We. And they had a son. And they got married. So I'm still close to Junior. And I asked him one day, are you homosexual? And he looked at me, he admitted. So I said, I want to write a paper on this. I said, because when I look in the card catalog, all I see is deviant behavior. And you ain't deviant to me. You're a lot of fun. I love you. So tell me. That's when he told me about the Massacre Press in San Francisco. That's when he told me a book, something with Twilight. I can't recall. There was almost like a Bible to the gay world, male gay. Twilight or something. It had something to do with stars. And he told me what to read, and Massacre Press in San Francisco, and all of that business. So I'm open to that now. Not quite open up to lesbians just yet, and we called them dykes then, bulldaggers or dykes. But I was open up to homosexuality. And that's what I learned when I read about it. That's what I learned about lesbos. I never forget that. And then I learned the clinical term, if you will. I shouldn't use the word clinical. I shouldn't use that term at all. Lesbos, lesbian. So I began to at least peep through that. So I don't know how I got to this, but coming to SNCC, I don't know if they were so much in the heat of the day that they didn't do a lot of thinking or contemplation like I did, and maybe others, that they weren't quite there. Thus,
can we pause for just a moment? Excuse me.
Okay, thus backed off the record.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Oh, we're back.
Okay, we're back. Please.
Well, I have to be careful how I say this. So in Tile, we had these kinds of discussions about people, personalities, identities, lifestyle. George Ware, who was from Buffalo, New York. George Davis, who was at that time from Providence, Rhode Island. Sammy Young, who had gone to school up in New Hampshire, Andover. No, he didn't go to Andover. He went to one of those prep schools.
These are enrolled students at Tuskegee.
Yeah, enrolled. My
Who are part of
classmates,
your
my
circle.
peers.
Exactly. Right.
The girls were Ruby Taylor, who was basically, she was from the Black Belt here in Alabama, Pickens County. Other girls, Kathleen Neal, later Cleaver, was in and out. She had been to a prep school. In other words, there was a broader, perspective and different levels on the spectrum of understanding. And we could have those discussions within Tile. SNCC was so caught up in the heat of the day that we very seldom had philosophical discussions at that time.
More tactical.
Yeah, much more tactical. How to deal with SCLC. They, usurping, grassroots organizing, day in, day out, drudgery. You come home, you're tired, you've been beaten, by a Klux or a Klux sympathizer, and so you didn't have that luxury. Even though SNCC did do a great deal of talking, or as we would say, great deal of talking, but it was all about who are you, where do you come from, and I don't know what that was about. It was an integrated group.
It sounds like you're just about to crystallize that notion of the scholar activist.
Oh yeah, we had done that.
Yeah.
You couldn't be dumb. You simply could not be dumb. You cannot be in the struggle, in the movement, if you were not doing well in school. The movement could not have insolent, I hate to use the word dumb, but that's, the vernacular, but undisciplined, unaware kinds of people.
Didn't you have to once, on that point, answer, was it Stokely Carmichael who put that question to you about, is your education really valuable? Shouldn't you
Oh
talk
yes.
out and
Oh yes. Oh, Stokely. Stokely really tried to get all, because he was impressed with Tuskegee kids. Plus, we had also told the administration, this is what we're going to do. We are freedom fighters. This institution has prepared us to be freedom fighters. I mean, we would just, not in arrogant terms, but in rational terms. I mean, what do you expect? And Stokely was impressed with that. I'm sure they had that at Howard. And it looked like they could have had it at Howard even better, because they had a president who was already Thurgood Marshall and all of that. And perhaps they were intellects, but they dealt with it as an elitism thing. I know where Stokely and Thedwell and all of them were coming from. So, and they had also SNCC people, and SNCC men in particular, had almost the same kind of attitude towards Southern blacks as a variation of how those white folks saw me at the Sanitarium. We were Southern. We were supposed to be country. They had stereotyped us not to be deep thinkers, let alone make analysis. And I think that kind of set them aback. And Stokely wanted everybody to drop out and join SNCC. And I confronted him. I say, you went back to Howard and got your degree. How dare you do that? Because also I saw a practical side. We needed the same reason that I had to tell Bettina Aptheker when she came down back in some years. I guess I was in '66, prior to my breaking my leg. And she was astonished that we had an ROTC and we weren't picketing. And I said, oh, no, Bettina. And I became very close, and to her father and her mother. I said, these kids go to school. Oh, I know what it was. Bettina had come down, and we had this grand parade of all these ROTC folk. And General Chappie James was leading, or General Benjamin O. Davis, because they both were Tuskegee Airmen and Tuskegee graduates. And Bettina was horrified. And I said, no, Bettina. I said, a lot of these students here need ROTC to get scholarships. It's just that simple. So it was a practical thing that Tuskegee kids had, as well as a philosophical underpinning. And I don't think SNCC people understood that very well, nor did anti-war people later, because we had one of the best draft counseling centers. We knew how to do CO, conscientious objectors.
We're going to get to that.
Okay, but getting back to Stokely could not argue.
Even let me take you back, just for economy of time, because I know that we're pressing against your day and when you need to leave this interview. So let me have you talk about that March of '65, from Bloody Sunday through. You will go ultimately. Well, you'll go on Wednesday on buses from Tuskegee to Montgomery, And then you will go and make the march also?
Yeah.
Yes. So tell me about that. Those
Okay.
critical days.
We're organizing for the march with SNCC people in Dallas County and so forth. I'm in meetings as direct action chair of tile with Jim Foreman and others, Hosea, Dr. King and all, in Birmingham at A.G. Gaston Motel. And it was decided that we were going to leave, kick off that Sunday, and we were going to march till we got to Montgomery. We thought it was going to be 3 days. You know, we had no idea. And that had been decided democratically. So even though we were philosophical, we were practical, we were also idealistic. This is what we had decided. So we come back to Tuskegee, and we're going to organize the East Black Belt.
East Black Belt, right.
Okay?
Right.
Not only Tuskegee, Macon County, but also Bullitt County, which included Union Springs, which is a Black Belt county. And so Sammy takes the lead in that, Sammy Young, raising money and stopping cars on what we call Campus Avenue, the main thoroughfare, at the stoplight, collecting buckets of money, ordering. See, we were also very organized. We were far more organized than SNCC, by the way, in terms of logistics. I was so concerned about the scholar activist concept that you could not cut classes and go on a demonstration. So we had to figure out who had cars. We didn't have that many cars, but we had to figure that out and do a grid, you know, a matrix or whatever. And you would go and pick it downtown at the supermarket or the registrar's office. We had transportation every hour on the hour, so you would not miss a class. SNCC was just like, what do you call? Startled, if you will. But Foreman, who is an organizer and a tactician, marveled at it. And so he really became the mentor for title kids on campus. Stokely soon left and went to Lowndes County because he can deal with the rule. You understand? The stereotype fit. Oh, I don't know if I want this on the record or not. But that's an assumption on my part. And they were practical people, deep common sense, you know, self-taught, were philosophical, still are, and their way of being philosophical, let me study that. That meant they were going to go in deep thought, think out all of the possibilities, you know, the obstacles and so forth. And I think people romanticize that. But anyhow, Foreman became the key person at Tuskegee, and Stokely became the key person in Lowndes County for whatever reasons. So Bloody Sunday happened, and we see it on television in the dorm because we were not there then. And we were horrified like the rest of the nation and the world. So we got to really gear up, get our stuff organized, organize the community, get cars. You know, we going to Montgomery. We going to meet them. And that because we thought it was going to be Wednesday. You have to remember, 3 days we thought it'd take, 3 or 4 days. And that Tuesday, I think it was, Dr. King knelt, prayed, and turned around. Unprincipled. It had been agreed upon by the collective that we were going to do this march. Naive youngsters. How could he do that? He promised. I mean, we almost went into infantile, behavior. He promised. You know how little children, but you promised. How can you break your promise? I mean, then we became fortified.
But you were very angry.
Oh, I was mad as hell. That night,
Tuesday night.
Judge Johnson, Frank Johnson, they just put a big thing up there. And I give him credit because he did a lot of things subsequently. around mental health and jails and so forth. His pen was a mighty sword. Issued this injunction. I was too angry. And Dr. Foster, and I'm still being called in. Oh, we had deposed the student body president because he was from New York and he was not a part of the movement and would not put the student government at the disposal of the movement. So George Ware from Buffalo, and this other guy was from New York City, deposed him, and George Ware assumed
Control of the student government.
student government.
Yeah.
But he had no power because he couldn't deal with the money or anything, right? But at least we had a space. And George was in graduate school. Chemistry, he was brilliant, still is brilliant. But Dr. Foster chose to deal with me, a woman, had TB, whatever his thing, he thought I was a little bit more malleable, not knowing where I was coming from. And so he called me in. I'm direct action of tile too, so I gave him the hook. And he said, "Gwen, you cannot march. There is an injunction." We said, "An injunction? What is that?" Piece of paper. And he showed it to me, and I looked at it, I said, "Oh, okay." And he had copies made and put it in the dining hall on the chairs. But we had already organized this caravan and the buses. So I paid him no mind, no attention, nor that piece of paper. I didn't read the piece of paper, but George Ware read the paper. He's brilliant. So we get on up and we tell him, I said, we're going. Now either you come and go with us. We had organized the cafeteria workers. And I'm sure Dr. Foster had something to do with that. But we had organized them, and if he had not agreed, there would have been a little strike by them. And my buses came, we had paid for them. The cars, the community was organized. Must have had about 30 or 40 cars in the caravan. Because we believe in organizing totally. That was my whole thing. Because I had come, from the Montgomery bus boycott. You got to have, the word at that time was a base. And the cafeteria folks fixed us little bologna sandwiches and an apple and a little paper thing of juice and so forth. And we come on down to Montgomery.
It's on Wednesday the 10th.
Wednesday the 10th. Foreman's book chronicles it very, very well. And so here we are in Montgomery. George had read Ware, and perhaps George Davis too, had read the injunction very well. And it said nothing about a march coming from Macon County to Montgomery. It was only an injunction from Selma to Montgomery. So they were able to play the legal. Meanwhile, of course, they put us in jail, and Dr. King and them are furious with us, and this Montgomery community turned on us, the bougies, at Dexter, and that's a whole nother story. They never had a mass meeting at Dexter. And I can tell you a whole story between Dexter and First Baptist, where we were kept all night in 1961 with the Freedom Riders, and how those two churches split. Dexter was an offshoot of First Baptist, a very lovely, beautiful church, ornate, pipe organ, terracotta ceilings, stained glass windows. The preacher there who did all of that was called Reverend Stokes. He was a mortician, but he was a race man. And if you go there to this day, he put those stained windows up, the pews from Italy, the whole nine, the pulpit. And if you look at the window, one of the stained huge, there is John the Baptist, baptizing Jesus, right? And above that pane is Reverend Stokes. Okay? You hear me talking about a race man. And so I have all these great stories. And when you go in there, the church, by the way, the architect was from Tuskegee. The ceiling, the attic, is 8 feet in depth. So down the road a piece, in which my grandfather built one little town, was called Newtown. initially was all plantation. And so all of the folks down the hill, what they call North Montgomery, Powdertown, Newtown, and my granddaddy built a lot of those little shotgun houses, would come up to the church with their overalls and whatever. And then now you get a few little doctors, well, not too many doctors, no lawyers, but you get in these la-di-da school teachers. And they don't want to be bothered with those field hands. So they get angry and go to Dexter, which is downtown and right up the street. Yeah, all of this affectation, this status foolishness. And for years, families was like, what do you call when you have family feuds? Families split, based on superficial class stuff. And it was only until Dr. King, who became pastor at Dexter, and they did not support nothing, absolutely nothing. The highfalutins became dear friends to Reverend Abernathy, who talks with a thick poem from Black Belt. I think he was from Marion, Perry County. They became close, then the churches became close, and then families became close. That's the story behind Dexter. So here we are on a March, cold, rainy, drizzly night, and we take refuge.
Because he has to see the governor. He refuses.
Oh, he puts George Davis and all of them in jail.
Yeah, and I got to say a couple other things here. Recount for this tape how many people you mobilized from the campus.
I think we had 2,300 students at the time. That I remember. About 1,500.
About 1,500 Montgomery.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
Okay, so 300.
All we had to do, we had to organize. We would be in the dining hall, and we would begin to stomp our feet on the floor. And that meant we had to all go to the valley because we were about to have a mass meeting, and everything was done democratically. We had to vote on everything, all of that. We were not involved in iconic leadership. There was no thing around women that I knew about at the time. It was all about if you had the skills, the analysis, if you could persuade, not so much persuasion, but persuasion by reason, then you became a leader.
Take me back to Dexter.
So for some reason the church is open. I don't know if we were locking churches or not at that time, or if somebody broke it, I don't know. But we were in Dexter.
As a refuge of sorts.
As a refuge, yeah. It was cold, it was drizzling. We had no bathroom. Foreman does the great pee-in, and all of these little silly tactics that the state troopers would do, and then the city police and the county, and they playing all silly games, and we're about tired of fooling around with all of their little foolishness, the authorities' foolishness. So we go to Dexter, Dr. King Church, and we're in there, and we wake up, sleep anywhere, on the floor, on the pews. The toilets won't flush. It's colder in there than it was outside. They cut the heat off. The lights wouldn't cut on. It was awful. Then we decided, well, we're going to take over this.
And you have to tell the tape how it was those things got cut off.
The deacons did it. I won't call names because they have what do you call gone through absolution. That's
Redeemed themselves.
Yeah, redeemed themselves. So it's no need calling names. But I was furious. So instead of leaving the church, we're going to stay there. Because the cops were outside the church. And that's when Alabama State students came and served as a buffer. But we still do, after we came outside, we still held the church because we had big meetings down there. And there was this big meeting discussion between George Ware and Foreman. And George he was older, he was a grad student. And George, I think, was looking out for the protection of the students. So he got into a whole state of mind as an adult. And Foreman had manipulated us, children. And here we are, stuck, can't get back to Tuskegee, it's cold, they're in jail. So George became protective, paternalistic, and Foreman as an adult over these little undergrads. And Foreman was a manipulator. Well, I didn't see it that way at all, so I took issue with George Ware. I said, no, we are grown. We knew precisely what we were doing. We knew the risks, and I think that was part of how I got elected student body president. How dare you be condescending? We're not sheep. We're scholars. And this is what we wanted to do. Nobody was killed. So that was a turning point. And we call that the march that wouldn't turn around. And some kids have researched the archives in my papers and have won state history awards. One kid in particular in New Mexico, his grandmother lives here. And he's a military kid, and he knew a Tuskegee student. Because, see, we had organized the ROTC. And during my administration, they were my personal bodyguards. Okay? And where was the munition shack? Oh, yeah, we knew all of that. I particularly didn't know where I was coming from or where Tuskegee kids were coming from. And so this young kid, and I read his paper at the State Archives as a presentation. His father knew a Tuskegee grad, ROTC grad, and he told him about the march that wouldn't turn around. I never used that name. That name came from this youngster.
Yeah. Let me ask about actually, John, let's pause for a minute and switch tracks.
Okay, we're rolling again.
Took a short break.
Okay. The march that wouldn't turn around. Because we had said it was to be a march, and Tuskegee students, led by Sammy Young, who was one of the great organizers, but it was a whole committee, buses and cars, to be true to what we had said. It was a relay march. People in cars would get out, like in the middle of a caravan, would get out and walk, and then the cars behind would come up, pick them up, students would get out. So we literally held to our word that it was a march, and then this youngster dubbed it or entitled it the march that wouldn't turn around.
Nice. Okay, let's take a short break.
Okay.
We're cooking.
Okay, we're back after a break, about 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll do a last segment here to finish up. Dr. Patton, thanks so much for your patience and hanging in there with us. I know it's a lot of hard work in your chair. Let me have
That's
you, if
my
you would.
postman.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry? Oh, that was, I think the mail carrier just came to the front door. That was the noise we heard. If you could talk a little bit about, think about the period from spring 65 forward, especially into 66, I guess. The changes that will quickly kind of reshape SNCC. And how you continued to push your thinking about the question of social change, race in the United States.
Oh, that's a tall order.
Yeah.
I'll try to be brief. If you look at Eyes on the Prize, and it recaptures the Selma to Montgomery March, you will see in Lowndes County, which was the longest stretch, and has been the most overlooked, is Selma to Montgomery, when it ought to read Selma to Lowndes to Montgomery. And I've always resonated with grassroots people And as you look at that, you see a lot of people on the side. Those were Lowndes County people. And some SNCC people. I was on the march initially. Being an organizer and perhaps a tacticianer, my greatest concern was how were the people going to eat? How were they going to go to the bathroom? So my little brain told me, well, Tuskegee feeds 2,300 students every day. Surely they ought to be able to prepare meals for the marchers. And so I went and talked to Dr. Foster about that, the president. And though we could not budget much money, and I had been on the march and saw the food, stayed overnight one night in one of the campsites. Lynn Chandler was there. I remember him so well. And I said, I can't take this food anymore. So I guess my sensibilities of how I was raised as a black solid middle class, and in the black caste, probably upper middle class. So my sensibility, and I was taught not to make distinctions among people. People are a product of their circumstances. And that's a whole nother philosophical influence that my father, as well as my extended family, instilled in me, not to make a difference. But I was tired of that food. And Tuskegee did provide a meal. I never forget it. A barbecued chicken. I was so pleased at Dr. Foster because I began to really feel now that he really understood the depth of what we were trying to do. And it was really a positive reflection of how we had been taught, what our purpose was, our mission, the Christian ethic, to care for the least of these, Matthew 25. So anyway, I just had to bring that in because that's still very poignant in my mind. And we didn't eat the stewed, like the boil up food that I had seen in the sanitarium. So the march is over. Lowndes County has a rich movement history, from slavery times to Reconstruction, all the way up. They were proud people, still are. And I thought they were being cheapened, not fully understood, and not respected for their deep, deep wisdom. So we're having these great discussions with the tile at Tuskegee, and SNCC people, and Jim Foreman in particular. We finally had come to the it's not a conclusion, but to the point that there is a fundamental distinction between integration and desegregation. And then desegregation led to self-determination. We were there. And the Lowndes County people, we got the Voting Rights Act, right? We got the power of the vote. Now what do we do with this vote? And the Lowndes County people made it very clear, John Hewlett, oh bless her heart, as much as I loved her, and stayed in her home, she ran for school board. She was a school teacher. It'll come to me. I have it in the archives back there. They said they didn't want to be mayor or run for even city council because we didn't even know what a city was. We didn't deal with city government. We dealt with county government.
Yeah.
They weren't interested in being state representatives. They were interested in holding those positions which were the closest to the people. Foremost being the high sheriff, who would just come unclothed, unrobed, cluxers, raiding and terrorizing the black community. They wanted the Board of Education so that their children can have a decent quality education, which had nothing to do with Bunsen burners, even though we needed them. But quality teaching. They wanted to be tax assessors because those black farmers who did have land were always assessed tremendously, while the white heirs of the white plantations were almost taxed nil. And then the collectors, the coroner, where black people will be found dead in the jail or on the roadside or in ditches. And the coroner will come and say it was suicide or self-inflicted. So that made a lot of us think again about what is the significance of the vote. And that was to elect people closest to the people. They wanted their own political party. There were efforts by Robert Kennedy, Attorney General at the time, to have the new black vote folded into the Democratic Party. And again, they dealt on a national level, on what we call far-fetched, our vicinity, our essence, the people who are closest to the people. We weren't interested, we didn't even know what a damn delegate was. Now, of course, we knew about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party,
Exactly.
Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and we made it very clear to SNCC that we were not going to replicate that model.
Yeah. So Lowndes County gets to build its own party.
We looked at it. It wasn't in competition. We just felt going to Atlantic City, some far distant place, might as well go to Mars from our range of experiences. We weren't interested in electing delegates. We were interested in electing the sheriff.
I have to ask, in that next election then, you think the election is stolen. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wrote about that. It was stolen.
Yeah. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I was there. There were still black people in Lowndes County. We were naive. We thought the vote was some modicum of freedom, and that we can vote, be a free voter. But we saw the white terror surface with vehemence. People who were tenant farmers, who had to have a relationship with the owners of the plantation, we still call it a plantation, were in a very dangerous position. And the landowner, the white plantation man, would bring the field hands, his tenant farmers, to the polls. Tell them how the reprisals were just enormous. And people who have nothing the reprisal was death. Because they couldn't take anything. We didn't have anything. So what could they take but our lives? But the people persevered. They voted. I wrote a piece called No Clouds in the Sky, where the plantation owner, property owner, white property owners, voted for everybody who worked on his property, in his fields. That was a lot. There was gun violence. I just have to give you my paper, which also has
Sure.
the voting
I'd love to see
tallies.
it. You did in that same, that was November 65 election, you did in part.
Now this is November 66. See, the Voting Rights Act was passed in August.
Sure.
We
66, excuse me.
Yeah, we began to organize in
Yeah.
Lowndes County.
Forgive me, I misspoke.
Okay,
You're exactly
okay,
right. In 66. You do, however, in part because of all the work that's been done in Macon County, you do elect a black sheriff in Macon County.
Oh
Yeah,
yes,
which is a
at the consternation of the black middle class bourgeoisie. He was dark skinned in hue. Lucius Amerson. There's a book written by his son. I think I have the book back here for you to take notes so you can follow up on it. Yes.
Let me ask a final question. I know we've really kept you a long time. I want to ask one key final question. The car accident in 67 is very unusual. The circumstances are very unusual.
Still don't know.
Yeah.
I can't even get a police report.
Yeah. Just if you would, just describe the basics of that episode.
Well, it was the eve of the first Black Power Conference, which was underwritten by Sharp, with SNCC people being the facilitators.
This is going to happen at Tuskegee.
At Tuskegee. You have to read Foreman's book because it didn't take place on Tuskegee campus. It was supposed to, and I had organized that, and was a part of where we were to meet in the rooms the night before. And Dr. Foster somehow canceled that, but Dean Phillips, Dean of Students, whom we had cultivated, was a part of us now. He was, supportive for what we were doing. And so he arranged something at the Boy Scouts camp or somewhere. Meanwhile, I'm in this car accident. I'm taking a young man to my grandmother's home, my mommy, to lay over, because I had arranged for him to fly to Canada to avoid the draft.
This is part of your anti-draft work has begun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we are in this mysterious car accident. We don't hit anything, nothing hits us. I don't know how it happened. And it happened, and evidently I blacked out because I don't remember anything until I woke up at John Andrews Hospital on the campus. And Foreman, all of the SNCC people were there, and Tuskegee, we got a new crop of Tuskegee people now. I had graduated, and they elected me, by the way. I was in graduate school at Tuskegee the summer of 66 before I went to Sharp as vice president. They wanted to re-elect me as president, but I had graduated, and there was something about the student body president had to be a senior. But again, George Ware, Sharp, with the legalese, said nothing about the qualifications of the vice president. So I ran as vice president and won. And my main thing then was that we got to line up presidents for the next 4 years, which we did. Warren Hamilton and Benny James and, and all, to keep this movement thing alive. That's how I think. I think like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that night, February the 10th, 1967, I'll never forget it, I'm in this tremendous car accident. I'm in John Andrews Hospital. So I'm at another, obstacle in my life. And I have to have blood transfusions and SNCC people and students. That's when I wrote the piece on Booker T. Washington.
Yeah. About the accident, your sense, it was such an odd thing. A part of your car failed, didn't it?
Yeah, the whole, axle rod broke in half.
Yeah. So you wonder if someone tampered with your car. Yeah.
I try not to even think about it.
Right.
But it has to be. I mean, how can an axle rod, isn't that the kind of like the skeleton, how does it crack in half?
Yeah.
But what's significant about that, and then we're going to conclude, is that I'm in the hospital. Dr. Hume, who's a bougie doctor, who never supported movement activities, really thought we were destroying what they thought the model city. That was the little thing that's why we tried to integrate the churches to prove. Now, are you crazy? These white folks don't like you. Okay, and that's another whole story. And so Dr. Hume, who hated us, the movement, me in particular, student body president, wanted to cut my leg off, amputate.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, no. And what kicked in, to be honest, was Freud. My whole thought process. I'm 22 years old, I think. And my thing was, what if a man and I are intimate, and some kind of, and we're kind of taking off our clothes sexily. And then I said, oh, wait a minute, I got to take off my leg. That was my motivation.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, that's honest.
Yeah. That's a young person's normal reaction, I think.
And so I called my paternal grandparents. No, I asked Dr. Hume to show you another stream of thought that shaped my consciousness. I said, have you talked to another doctor about this? Have you had second opinion? And he was caustic, and he says, that's what's wrong with you. You think you know everything. And then I leaned over, I said, well, have you talked to the Lord about it?
With the Lord?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he said, well, what does God have to do with it? So I leaned back. I said, put the piece of paper on the nightstand. I called my grandparents, my paternal grandparents. My granddaddy is straight as an arrow, deacon, trustee, emeritus, never smoked, never drank, Sunday school superintendent for life, read the Bible, taught me the Bible, and all of the precepts and all of that. And I told him, I said, my dear, this man said that he didn't need to talk to the Lord about my foot. Come and get me. My grandmother and granddaddy dispatched my cousin. They came and got me because this man was a heathen. And that's how I got out of the hospital. I think if I never said that, then they would have sided with the doctor because he knows best. My little brain but when he couldn't understand that the Lord had everything to do with. And then when I got back home, I went to stay with my mommy, my maternal grandmother, because I just found so much comfort with her. That's when I called Bettina Aptheker. Pull all of my ducks in a row.
That began your transition to New York?
That I told Bettina, I got to find me a doctor. Yeah. What about the Medical Committee for Human Rights?
Yeah. Medical Committee, yeah. Let's use,
that's how I got to New York.
Let's use that point as our stopping point today. You've been so generous, and it's just such an honor and privilege to be with you. Thank you so much.
But let me, because
Patton.
Thank you so much, but I want to be fair to SNCC. And so it's when I'm in New York, it's the SNCC people, and particularly Jim Foreman, the core people who had a relationship with SNCC people. And then my fiance was in New York, who really came to support me. Richard Wright's daughter, I became a cause celebre. Julia Wright, Richard Wright's daughter, would come and see me when she came from Paris, and all Bettina Aptheker, the Communist Party, the Social Workers Party, the Progressive Labor Party, and I was introduced to all of these new people. Mary Kochiyama, I never seen a Japanese person in my life. You know, Hispanic, I shouldn't say that. Latinas and Latinos, Puerto Ricans. I never saw a Spanish person in my life. So my world was just really even open even more. And so when I got out of the hospital or on those furloughs from the hospital, because I would be in there for 6 months at a time, organized a union, $11.99. I mean, played poker and won all of the money because I'm a good poker player, and all of that. That when I got out, that's when I said I will work for SNCC, and I did.
Yeah. Thank you so much for what a wonderful visit. Thank you.
From the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.